All right, folks, you are welcome to episode 18th of what I hope is now your favorite podcast on the subject of the American system of political economy, presenting to you, as I always do, the world leading authority on the subject of political economy. Oh, I take that, I need to rephrase that, on the subject of the American system of political economy, Mr. Neil Martin. So what do we have today? We have none other than Mr. Friedrich List. And Neil, as you've come to expect, is not holding back, is going after our favorite punching bag, the British system, and is identifying that the British system is nothing other than the killer of private and public credit. But before I turn it over to Neil, let me talk just a little bit about Mr. Friedrich List. List, as Neil describes him, is the best political economy of the first half of the 19th century. List had economic intel on the British to literally have one see that favoring British free trade was absolutely insane. But time and time again, Europe and the United States went with British free trade. The United States had tariffs, and Europe had treaties. Treaties were better than tariffs because treaties are very deceiving. They can make it seem as if the treaty is to everyone's advantage, but it is more than meets the eye. England always portrayed the other side that they had the deal in the treaty. They did this with the Methuen Treaty and the Eden Treaty. The Portuguese got robbed through the Methuen Treaty, and List notes that Adam Smith, Satan himself, denied it. William Pitt introduced stupid French negotiators to Adam Smith. And as a result of this, what did we get? We got the Eden Treaty. The storm of Bastille is nothing compared with the Eden Treaty, the storming of Bastille. How is an economic treaty that destroys domestic commerce, domestic industries, and credit seen as a wise policy? We have to see that tariffs and treaties were a zero-sum game for the British. She had to be on top, and other nations had to be the losers. The British system needs a mudslide society, an army of non-consumers. We know that they hate domestic industry and domestic commerce, but they also hate private and public credit. Did the Manchester School favor permanent allies or permanent interests? They favored permanent interests. They were always playing the zero-sum game, and people are too gullible. They think free trade is the second coming of Christ. Free trade is the cure for everything. Free trade has lifted so many countries out of poverty. We have lost count. Not even God knows. Adam Smith, the most evil economist ever. Adam Smith rejected that the Portuguese got the short end of the stick in the Methuen Treaty of 1703. He goes so far as to say England lost the Methuen Treaty. How it came to the Portuguese is hideous, conniving, and sinister. As soon as Portugal's protectionist Count Ericeira died, the British man in Portugal, Mr. Methuen, proposed a free trade treaty with the Portuguese. The Portuguese would have the British market in wine. Wow, this was such a coup. England was no longer sovereign. Portugal had the monopoly in regards to the wine trade in England. Adam Smith has right got English screwed. Does Adam think people do not know all the British do is play geopolitics? Adam Smith conveyed that a place such as the 13 colonies could have an imbalance of trade, export gold and silver, and increase her debt to foreign nations and still be prosperous. Adam Smith was trying to make the colonial trade look heavenly. The rejection of colonial economic policy led to the American Revolution. The demand to have domestic commerce led to the American Revolution, but the British never gave up. Each free trade tariff in the 19th century for Russia, Europe, America, and other countries was a victory for the British. Nations were never supposed to be sovereign nation states. An example of a free trade tariff is the Compromise Act of 1833. It was not a win for the Democrats, South and North, but for England. Friedrich List never pleaded with Europe and America to be agricultural economies. He wanted them to be sovereign nation states, and he knew credit what was needed. The British do not want this. So there you go. The battle line is drawn between Mr. List and the British. Over to you, Neil.
All right. So the British system, the killer of private and public credit. Presentation on Friedrich List. Next slide show, Victor. Okay. So what we're going to concentrate on this slide is all the way at the bottom where it says J.P. Lippincott and Company as the publishers of National System of Political Economy. They also published Henry Carey's Principles of Social Science. So this is big. This is not some type of small company publishing a political economy book, right? And so what I want to present to you all is that the political economy books, the political economist, they're part of economic history. And Friedrich List is the best economic historian for the 19th century, right? Economic history will tell you how nations advance. It will also tell you how nations did not advance and didn't prosper, right? The role of an economic historian is to tell you how a nation advanced, who are the most profound economists, and who's your enemy, the British. Next slide, Victor. Okay. So the compromise tariff was done to get rid of the tariff of 1828, which was the first Colbert tariff that the United States of America ever had. The British system, the uh, the Eastern banking establishment, and the slavocracy were called the tariff of 1828, the tariff of abominations. It was no abomination. The compromise tariff of 1833 was an abomination. Okay, so the tariff of 1828, which is called the first Colbert tariff by Henry C. Carey, worked for the United States of America. It brought back or it resuscitated domestic commerce, resuscitated domestic industries, and it circulated the currency properly, right? The Compromise Tariff Act, what you got to understand about it, it was a full out attack on the American system of political economy. This was not just a matter of tariffs. The Compromise Tariff Act, what happened in the 1830s, the National Bank got destroyed. Internal improvements got squashed. The United States of America, as a sovereign nation state, was in big trouble, right? And what happened as a result of the Compromise Tariff Act is something a true economic historian like Friedrich List brought out. He described and detailed what the Compromise Tariff Act meant for the United States of America. And I'm going to read the Compromise Tariff Act. The Compromise Tariff Act was an act that reduced the duties gradually of protected items in the United States of America in order for the South to stay in the Union, right? Who was the South? The slavocracy, a bunch of free traders. Can you actually think you can trust free traders? All right, here's Frederick List. Why, when the Compromise Act had induced heavy importations of foreign manufactured goods into the United States, did the balance of trade there become during a series of years so remarkably unfavorable, and which and why such unhappy revulsions and such protracted derangements of their internal economy? Why at this moment are the United States so encumbered with raw materials of every kind, cotton, tobacco, cattle, and grain, that prices have fallen one half? And why are they, notwithstanding, unable to restore the equilibrium between imports and exports, to extinguish their debt to England, and to reinstate upon a solid basis their system of credit? Okay, Frederick List is going on about the Compromise Act of 1833. What did this do? This had irrational foreign trade flourish. That's what free trade is. British free trade is irrational foreign trade. Okay, so who were the countries in the 19th century that went with irrational foreign trade? You have the United States, you have Spain, you have France, you have Russia, you have Portugal, and you have colonies of the British, right? Now, what this Compromise Tariff Act did, it destroyed domestic commerce in the United States of America. So, what was the solution by the slavocracy, the Eastern banking establishment, and free traders? Buy in the cheapest market. Is buying in the cheapest market, is that symbolic of your nation having domestic commerce and domestic industries? No. Is it symbolic of your nation circulating the currency properly? No, not at all whatsoever, right? Free trade did not restore the credit of the United States of America. Free trade didn't restore domestic commerce, domestic industries, didn't circulate the currency properly, and it didn't restore the credit of the United States. Now there are a few things that Frederick List highlights: irrational foreign trade, irrational foreign trade with raw materials, and then the United States of America being unable to extinguish their debt and to restore their credit. Now, what you have to understand about free traders, when free traders talk about protectionism, they're not going to talk about the currency circulating properly. Two, they're not going to talk about the United States of America or a country revitalizing or creating domestic commerce. Three, they are not going to talk about a country revitalizing its credit. It's just not going to. It's just not going to happen. All they're going to tell you about protectionism is that it raises prices of commodities. It's economic warfare. What? You want to call protectionism economic warfare, but you're not going to call a system that destroys your domestic commerce, destroys your currency, doesn't have your currency circulate properly, and doesn't restore credit. You don't call that economic warfare? That's the economic warfare, right? So we have all this, right? What about the, let's see, number two? Number two was raw materials, right? Okay, so a hallmark of free trade, right? They say that exports follow imports. So the amount of imports you import will be the same as the amount of exports that you get. So what was the United States of America exported during that time period in the 1830s? Cattle, grain, cotton, and tobacco. They may say cotton is king, cotton is a princess, right? And so the price of raw materials plummeted in the United States of America. They couldn't pay for the manufactured goods with agricultural goods. And because they couldn't pay for the manufactured goods with agricultural goods, they got into debt, which we will call a trade imbalance, right? But the British school, they think nothing of a trade imbalance. That is a blatant lie. Throughout the presentation, we are going to see that the United States of America knew that this trade imbalance thing was not cool and it was not working, and they had to take the free traders had to take other measures, right? Okay, so the last point is that this irrational foreign trade destroyed the credit of the United States. 1840, Friedrich List is saying in 1840 that the credit of the United States of America was in horrible shape. All the protectionists that talk about free trade periods, such as Henry Carey, they are going to tell you that when we had free trade, our credit went to hell. We could not get credit from foreign countries. We didn't have public credit. And just think of this, right? People want to say free trade is so good. Countries that have free trade, that believe in irrational foreign trade, which who are not England and the United States. Perfect example. Ireland and India. Did Ireland and India have a good did they have a good credit? No. Did they have public credit? No. Did they have good private credit? Nope. The United States of America, too, under the Compromise Act of 1833, had horrible credit. If a government has no credit, if a government is unable to have private credit from benevolent countries, they're going to have a hard time surviving. And the United States of America, along with, well, mainly with Ireland and India, had a hard time surviving. What we have to understand, Ireland had famines. India had famines. Their domestic commerce was ruined. They had no credit, and they were all under British free trade. And people want to tell me that, oh, the United States of America had nothing to worry about. How many protective tariff laws were passed in India and in Ireland? Not that many. They were completely destroyed. The United States of America was almost destroyed. But we had a constitution. The constitution says Congress shall regulate trade and commerce. Regulating trade and commerce. You can't talk about regulating trade and commerce if you don't have credit. If you do not have credit, you're not a sovereign nation state, right? I'll ask you this question. NAFTA, North American Free Trade Agreement. What type of credit did Mexico and Canada get with NAFTA? None. What type of credit did the United States of America get with NAFTA? None. What's the purpose of credit? Credit is an investment in the future. Credit says man is the immortal species. And if man is the immortal species, he has to be building beautiful things. We should not be using credit for buying Bitcoin or the import export bank. Those institutions do not need to exist. We need domestic commerce. We need for every country to have domestic commerce and credit. Okay, Victor, the next slide, please. All right. Why the British love the South. Okay. So the British love the South. And why did the British love the South? The British loved the South not because of slavery. They loved the South because of free trade. Hold on. The South was for free trade? Well, you know, Project 1619, leftists, anarchists, socialists, communists, whatever you call them, they never talk about the South being a major advocate of free trade. They talk about slavery. Okay. Why the British loved the South. For a long time, in fact, such a prospect appeared to suit the taste, the patriotism, the business, and the wants of those planters better than the independence and the grandeur of the United States. It was only in the first exaltation of liberty and public emancipation that they dreamed of industrial independence. But their zeal for industrial independence quickly subsided, and during the last quarter of a century, the prosperity of manufacturers in the middle and eastern states annoys them. They have undertaken to prove in Congress that American prosperity depends upon the industrial domination of England over the United States. What less can all this mean than that North America will be richer and happier by becoming again an English colony? An English colony. The new states will be much happier if they became an English colony. That the British will make the young United States prosper again if they go along with free trade. What does free trade create? Free trade creates irrational foreign commerce. So this is a problem, right? As Friedrich List first states, the South were first for protectionism. Then they switched over to free trade along with the Eastern banking establishment, right? And I've already said that the British liked the South, not because of slavery, but because of free trade. Free trade would destroy the United States of America, but they will say, you're going to have it so much better being a colony of the British again. Who in their right mind will tell United States citizens today that things will get much better if we become part of the British Commonwealth and you are no longer citizens but subject to the king? That's insane. What was the South doing? When the South sided with free trade, the slaveocracy, when they sided with free trade, they were saying that domestic commerce is not important anymore. That credit is not important anymore. Let's take a look at something, right? I'm saying that the British system of free trade kills private and public credit. Here is a fact for you. Where was all the private credit coming from to build infrastructure projects or to build up the South if they had the chance to? Where was it coming from? It wasn't coming from the South. It was coming from the North. The North was industrialized. The South was not industrialized. The planters, the slavocracy system, they don't want to put up an institution of private credit. They don't want to say that the earth is the great labor savings bank. They weren't using their resources. They buried their talent. And then they said, if we are a part of England again, we will be prosperous. Let England have economic domination over us. Everything will be okay. Who in their right mind would say that? Maybe someone from Congress might say that. So Friedrich List, the South has a problem. It's not slavery. The South's problem is free trade. They have openly stated that things will be better if we were under British rule. Because with free trade, everything's going to be all right. No. Free trade destroyed domestic commerce, destroyed domestic industries, destroyed the circulation of the currency, and destroyed the credit of a nation. And free traders don't want to bring that up. Next slide, Victor. Adam Smith on how to destroy national sovereignty. What people have to understand about Adam Smith can say something. You don't know how evil it is. This is Adam Smith's signature move. He can say something, it goes above your head, you don't notice how evil it is, but it is indeed evil, right? Adam Smith was deployed by William Pitt, Lord Shelburne, to write The Wealth of Nations. Here's a paraphrase of what Adam Smith said in The Wealth of Nations. And this is coming from Friedrich List. Friedrich List is the best refuter of Adam Smith, and he has the best intelligence on Adam Smith, right? So here it is. He says, now, it was precisely by the example of these colonies of North America before the War of Independence that Adam Smith expected to prove the paradox above mentioned, that a country may augment its exports of gold and silver, restrict its circulation of the precious metals, extend its circulation of banknotes, increase its debt to other nations, and yet go on and prosper. How can anybody see that as harmless? It's flat out evil. Let's dissect what Adam Smith is talking about. Oh, it's perfectly fine to export tons of silver and gold. What does that mean? That means importing tons of manufactured products, right? We've already seen this in the Tariff Act of 1833. Friedrich List stated that the Tariff Act of 1833 destroyed the United States of America. What Adam Smith is talking about is the same thing that the Tariff Act of 1833 did. And Adam Smith wants to tell us that you can still prosper. You can still prosper if you get rid of domestic commerce. If you don't have your currency circulating properly. You can still be prosperous if you're in if you have more debts with nations. More debt with nations. Okay. Um, there's nothing wrong with that. You gotta see debt as a national blessing coming from Alexander Hamilton and from Edward King, who said a national debt is a national ability. A national ability, right? If a country has a national ability, I hope it's a national ability to be able to thrive and progress, right? Here we have the United States of America, the 13 colonies. Adam Smith is saying that they can increase their debts, no problem. But hold on, national ability. Does Adam Smith think that the United States of America has a national ability? Does he even think countries have national abilities? He doesn't. A national ability is a power that the federal government has, right? If a government has a national ability, why would it allow for silver and gold to go out of the country? Why would it allow for domestic commerce to never grow? Why would it allow for domestic industries to never grow? Why would it allow for the currency to not circulate? Why would it allow for credit to not be used in the physical economy? Adam Smith is evil. Adam Smith thinks that laissez faire will lead to prosperity. We've already seen what happened in 1833. Do people want to know what happened after the American Revolution? The Articles of Confederation came. Do we have the Articles of Confederation today? No. Alexander Hamilton organized for a constitution. And what was the main driving force of the constitution? The main driver was we wanted domestic industries, and we want domestic industries. We want domestic commerce. Alexander Hamilton, when he was 17 years old, told the farmers, "We're going to bank on domestic commerce." What else did Alexander Hamilton do? He wrote the report on public credit. He wrote the report on manufacturing. Adam Smith is saying that the 13 colonies doesn't need to have domestic commerce. They can be an agricultural economy. It didn't work. It didn't work, and free traders don't want to talk about it. Free trade failed in the United States of America after the American Revolution. It failed. The Congress didn't have power to regulate trade and commerce. They wanted Congress to have the power to regulate trade and commerce because it's in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. And Alexander Hamilton said that one of the deficiencies of the Congress is that they don't have the ability to regulate trade and commerce. We are seeing on how Adam Smith is flat out evil, and that the United States of America becoming an agricultural economy, the United States of America importing importing commodities and exporting silver and gold. That was indeed horrible. That was bad. Friedrich List brought this out. Friedrich List is the only political economist that paraphrases that Adam Smith quote, saying that the 13 colonies should not care about getting into debt with foreign nations, should not worry about not on its currency not circulating properly, and should not worry about importing all types of goods that they can make themselves, right? So Adam Smith is evil. Friedrich List knows what he's talking about concerning Adam Smith. Friedrich List knows that Adam Smith is not a nation builder. Friedrich List is a nation builder. Credit is for nation building. Friedrich List knows that. Credit is for nation building. The British system destroys credit. Now, can you imagine if the United States of America kept this policy that Adam Smith wanted the United States of America to have, and we just continued on being the 13 the 13 states with the Articles of Confederation? Where would we be today? We would be nowhere. We would not exist. Next slide, show Victor. Okay, number 4, what the British did with credit. Okay, so the British, they were they had something credit that foreign countries didn't have, like Brazil, like Mexico, like India, like Ireland, sometimes the United States of America, right? But the British never used their credit for anything good, right? So here's what Friedrich List says. England is like a rich banker who, without a shilling in his pocket, can draw upon his correspondents far and near for any sum he requires. But when an extraordinary export of money takes place among many nations, purely agricultural, the conditions of the latter is far from being favorable. The means which they have of procuring the specie they need are limited not only by the small exchangeable value of their agricultural products, but also by the obstacles which foreign tariffs oppose to the exportation of their commodities. They are like the poor man who has no correspondents, upon who consequently has no resource in time of difficulty, but that wishes in the hands this power of commanding the amount of money needful for its eternal commerce is obtained chiefly by the production of merchandises and values, the exchangeable power of which approaches nearest to that of the precious metals. Wow. So Frederick List is acknowledging that it's only England that has all the stroke concerning access to credit. He is saying the British, they have access to the credit, right? They have it made, but they're not doing anything good with this credit, right? He says the countries, List says the countries that are purely agricultural who get into trouble by having a massive export of money, gold and silver, they are completely out of luck. They cannot get any type of credit whatsoever. But hold on. Adam Smith wanted the 13 colonies to be an agricultural economy. The Compromise Tariff Act of 1833 wanted the United States of America to export raw materials and foodstuffs and forget about, yes, forget about domestic industries. And Frederick List is saying that purely agricultural country, they don't have the stroke at all whatsoever. They do not have access to credit. Not only that, there's a part. Frederick List says, but whom on the contrary is drawn upon when the rich are in need, and who consequently has no resource in time of difficulty. The agricultural countries have no resources in a time of difficulty. Hello, national nobility. If your country has resources in a difficult time, it is a sovereign nation state. A country that does not have resources in a time of difficulty, they are not a sovereign nation state. They are a nation that the British want. They don't want sovereign nation states. One might be saying, why are you talking about sovereign nation states so much? Right? Well, my teacher in political economy, Lyndon LaRouche, emphasized sovereign nation state. Who is the one that had me emphasize public credit and private credit so much? Lyndon LaRouche. I've looked at political economy books since 2005. I've seen Henry Carey. I've seen Hamilton. I've seen Friedrich List. I've seen William Elder. Friedrich List has a unique way of talking about how important credit is. But let me just remind you, right? The agricultural countries have no resources in time of difficulty. They're not sovereign nation states. They're not sovereign nation states. They have no national ability. The whole purpose of having a sovereign nation state is to be able to act and have resources in a time of difficulty. What resources did Ireland and India have in time of difficulty? What resources does the United States of America have in a time of difficulty? We don't have any resources. We look upon a national debt as some type of burden, right? The national debt should be seen as a national blessing, right? The country, a sovereign nation state, has to have resources in time of difficulty. The British do not want countries to have that. The British, they want to have resources in time of difficulty, but they're not going to do anything good. All right. Next slide, Victor. Okay. How to become a permanent debtor to the British. Okay. That's kind of funny. Why would a nation want to become a permanent debtor to the British? How did the British make countries become permanent debtors to them? Here's what Friedrich List says, that a country greatly inferior to England in capital and manufactures can't receive without limitation her manufactures, but upon condition of becoming her permanent debtor, dependent upon her institutions of credit and involved in the vortex of her agricultural, manufacturing, and commercial revulsions. I'm just going to throw this out here, right? Um, if you want to create permanent debtors with your trade policy, that is ultimate economic warfare. That is a war crime. It is much more than an economic warfare. It's a economic war crime. Not only that, that type of policy would never create the Treaty of Westphalia, right? Why would the advantage of the other principle say we want to create permanent debtors? If you want to create permanent debtors, you don't want these nations to have resources in a time of difficulty. You don't want these nations to be agro-industrial economies. You don't want these nations saying that we're not going with geopolitics. You want to destroy these nations. Being a permanent debtor to England means you want to destroy the nation, right? Let's take a look at domestic commerce, right? Domestic commerce. Does domestic commerce ever show that a nation does not have economic independence? Irrational foreign trade is something central bankers love. It deals with having them hooked on Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations. hooked on the wealth of nations. And we've already seen, it has already been proved that Adam Smith does not want countries to have resources in time of difficulty. If you destroy the currency, if you export silver and gold, if you destroy domestic commerce, if you make it completely impossible for a sovereign nation state to have a funded debt and a sinking fund, what you have done, you have made them a permanent debtor to the British. And what I want to bring out in this presentation is that the British come up a lot in this presentation right here. And why do they come up a lot? The British fundamentally hate the Treaty of Westphalia. They want weak governments. They do not want sovereign nation states. They don't want countries to have the resources to deal with difficulties. Who said that? Friedrich List. If your country does not have access to credit, you're a debtor nation. A debtor nation, being a permanent debtor to the British. What's that debt for? Debt payment. That debt is not productive. That debt is not a blessing. You will not see a national ability out of that debt. Man, a permanent debtor. What type of person who loves free trade will think that it's perfectly fine for nations to become permanent debtors to the British Empire in the 19th century and to the IMF today, right? What does the IMF do? The IMF creates permanent debtors. The British Empire has outsourced its evil activities, right? And the IMF makes countries into permanent debtors, right? The IMF, it will never, ever, ever implement what it was supposed to implement under FDR. The World Bank and the IMF currently, right now, they have a policy of making countries permanent debtors. They never talk about saying, oh, Gambia, Ghana, Argentina, Chile, Bangladesh, we want you to have resources in a time of difficulty. They're never going to say that. That's not free trade thought. And the BRICS has to see that, going along with the IMF and the World Bank and the United States of America and England, they don't want you having resources to deal with difficulties. So we need a new financial system, right? A new financial system as outlined by Lyndon LaRouche, right? So that's a policy. A policy of creating permanent debtors doesn't see it that way. They love geopolitics. When you see that a nation wants to create permanent debtors, they are in love with geopolitics, and that's the British. All right, next slide, Victor. Okay, how British credit made the US become a slave. All right, how British credit how British credit made the United States become a slave. Okay, so I was telling you guys is that the British do not use credit to do anything benevolent to countries. And here's an example how British made the US a slave to the British. How British credit made the US become a slave. that owing to the facilities thus offered to English manufacturers and American importers, the people of the United States for many years consumed more imported goods, more values than they could pay for in agricultural products, and for which payment can only be made by exporting stocks and public securities. Public securities. We're going to touch upon that. That in such circumstances, the Americans have employed in their banking business and in their circulation the specie which the Bank of England could, for the chief part, withdraw at its pleasure. Okay, so another aspect of economic warfare. We're not going to talk about an imbalance of trade. We're not going to talk about on how the British destroyed domestic industries in the United States of America. They were headhunting, right? Their other target was making the United States of America financially impotent. They were doing financial warfare on the United States of America. But what we have to understand is that these Democrats and these Southern Democrats in the United States of America notice that the agricultural products that they were exporting doesn't match all the imports that we were doing. So the imports don't follow the exports. This is what free traders actually said. They said that you do not have to worry about an imbalance of trade because the exports follow the imports. What does that mean? That means if you have $100 million of imports, you will have $100 million of exports. That's baloney. Anyone who is saying that right now, they're either gullible or they're just downright evil, right? Okay, so the United States of America, they couldn't pay their imbalance of trade because the agricultural products was just not enough. What was their next move? Oh, we're going to export stocks and public securities to England. Really? You're going to export stocks, sell bonds, and public securities to the British? That's debt. That's debt. You're sending you're selling public securities to England, and Friedrich List is already saying the Bank of England, the main Bank of England, the main bank of the whole entire UK. They have public securities from the United States in the form of specie. If they wanted to destroy the United States of America like that, all they had to do is get their specie, saying that when you give us these public securities and when you have to pay the piper, your currency is going to contract. And if your currency contracts, what does that mean? That means loss of support in domestic industries, loss of supporting infrastructure projects, loss of helping out farmers, loss of private credit, and destruction of domestic commerce, right? The British know exactly what they are doing when they say, do not worry about a trade imbalance. They know exactly what they're doing. They are going to destroy your country economic wise, financial wise, too. And you're not going to see it coming. Next slide, show Victor. All right. Russia saved herself with protectionism. So at the end of the Napoleonic Wars, a whole lot of countries, including the United States, including France, Germany, other countries in Europe, and Russia were hit with floods of British goods coming into Europe, the United States, and in Russia. This is a story that is not told. Russia saved herself, right? The only people that talk about on how Russia saved her economy are US political economists that represent the American system and Friedrich List. There's Matthew Carey, there's Friedrich List, there's there's Henry Carey, there's some others, right? But let's just concentrate on that. Oh, George B. Curtis too, right? Okay. So Russia saved herself with protectionism. Free trade wasn't working for Russia. They had to do something, right? Okay. This is Frederick List. The most clear-sighted and profound statesman of Russia, Count Nesselrode, did not hesitate to avow it publicly. In an official circular of 1821, he declared that Russia is compelled by circumstances to recur to a system of independent commerce, that the products of the empire found no market abroad, that the manufacturers of Russia were ruined or are upon the verge of ruin, that the money of the country was being carried off into foreign parts, and that the most solid commercial establishments were at the brink of destruction. The solitary effects of the protective system adopted by Russia aided not less than the disastrous consequences of the restoration of free trade to discredit the doctrines and assertions of mere theorists. Capital, talent, and labor flowed in from all the civilized countries, especially from England and Germany, attracted by the advantages offered to domestic manufacturers. Count Nesselrode was an important figure in Russian history. He's no saint, but we have to give him credit on saying that Russia is going to develop domestic industries and we're going to bank on domestic commerce. That's what he should be known for. If you ask any Russian what happened in 1821 and say, who saved Russia? They're not going to say protectionist and protectionism. They're just not going to say it, right? So what we have to focus on, right? Count Nesselrode in 1821 released a circular. Free trade ain't working. Our currency is going abroad. Our manufacturers are ruined. We need to go with protectionism. We want an independent commerce. What is an independent commerce? Is an independent commerce irrational foreign trade? No. An independent commerce is having domestic commerce. Russia wanted to bank on domestic commerce. Russia was no longer interested in a global market. Do you really think the British would allow for Russia or for other countries to outdo it in foreign trade? No. No way at all. The only thing that they wanted those Europe, Russia, the United States, please export to us foodstuffs and raw materials. We will do the producing of manufacturing goods. And if you try to do that, we're going to do something to you. Right? The British spent so much resources in getting countries to not be protectionist. Right? One of the greatest ones that they created was the Cobden Club. I'm not going to talk about that, right? So I just wanted to show you on how the British were never going to allow for Russia to have domestic commerce and to have foreign trade. But Russia said, we're going to build up our domestic commerce, right? And then let's take a look at the last thing. List says capital, talent, and labor flowed in from all the civilized countries, especially from England and Germany, attracted by the advantages offered to domestic manufacturers. So protectionism, Russia doing protectionism, attracted capital, talent, and labor into Russia to build up Russia's domestic economy, to build up its domestic commerce. Ireland, Portugal, Turkey, the Ottoman Empire, and India did not have that capability because they were not a sovereign nation state. What this quote shows is that Russia chose to become a sovereign nation state. Russia said, it's not working being a permanent debtor to the British. It's not working with laissez faire. It's not working with free trade. We have to go with the American system of political economy. We have to implement protectionist policies. And that's what it did, right? And who brought that to us in a political economy book? Friedrich List. He was the second he was the second guy to do that. So Friedrich List, he's the dude is on fire. Um he knows how to organize an economy because if you want to organize an economy, you need to read The National System of Political Economy by Friedrich List. Victor, next slide, please. Okay. All right. So hopefully I have shown you guys who are the British. The British doesn't want any country to have the resources to deal with a difficulty. They don't want that. They don't want that at all, right? That's the British, right? Who the British are. Thus, all the English treaties of commerce exhibit a constant tendency to make every country with which they negotiate subservient to their industry and profit, offering to all apparent advantages in the purchase of agricultural products and raw materials. Their constant effort has been to ruin the industry of the countries by the cheapness of their manufactures and by the length of their credits. When they cannot secure a low tariff, they try by fraud or cunning device to elude the duties, or they organize smuggling upon a large scale. They succeeded in the first plan in Portugal, and by the second plan, and in the and by the second in Spain. Okay, so Frederick List is saying, listen, guys, when the British are doing treaties with you, they want to make it seem as if you're on the catbird seat, that you're the cream of the crop, that you have the advantage, and that we, the British, we just want to see you, we just want to see you better off. That's a load of baloney. Frederick List knew that the way that England got the better of you in trade is by treaties in Europe. And Frederick List says what was the first plan for Portugal in Portugal? They went by the first plan, right? The first plan in Portugal was the Methnian Treaty. If you read The National System of Political Economy by Friedrich List, the G.A. Matilli translation, and you don't come out hating the Methnian Treaty and not knowing what the Methnian Treaty did to the domestic commerce of Portugal, then you must be some type of environmentalist that doesn't know how to read books properly, right? Funny story. I actually had a you know associate. I let him read Frederick List's National System of Political Economy. The only thing he came out concerning the national system of political economy in Friedrich List is that Friedrich List liked windmills. Come on, that doesn't make any sense. Windmills? Friedrich List knew how to organize an economy, right? Friedrich List said the Muthian Treaty destroyed domestic commerce for Portugal, right? It destroyed domestic commerce for Portugal. This is not taught in economic history, right? If you want to learn economic history, do not look at British system economists, the free traders. Do not look at them. Do not look at the British system economic historians if they exist. Do not look at the present batch of free traders to try to find out what is economic history because they are going to completely lie to you about such things, such as the tariff of 1828, the compromise tariff of 1833, Count Nesserol and Russia and what they did in 1821, the Methuen Treaty on how the British destroyed domestic commerce in Portugal, right? So the British destroyed domestic commerce in Portugal and inflicted a fatal wound on the economy of Portugal. And look at it, look at Portugal today. What is Portugal doing today? It's a part of the European Union. Wow. What type of domestic commerce does Portugal have? What type of political economists does Portugal have? None. What type of statesman does Portugal have that's going to fight the EU? None. What type of statesman does Portugal have that's going to go after NATO? What Portuguese politician or political party or Portuguese economist is going to say the Muthian Treaty destroyed us? They're never going to say it. If you go online and look at the Methuen Treaty, they're going to make it seem as if the Methuen Treaty had its good points and bad points, but it was never an attack on the sovereignty of Portugal. It was an attack on the sovereignty of Portugal. The British, what are the British known for? They don't want you having any resources to deal with difficulties. And you're going to sign a treaty with them? That's insane. The British know how to destroy private credit and public credit. What am I saying? Why are you talking about private credit and public credit? Well, we have the Belt and Road Initiative. We have to build up the world. We need peace through development. And if we're going to have peace through development, we are going to need a whole lot of private credit from foreign nations and a whole lot of public credit. China can't do it all by herself, right? Friedrich List knew that. Friedrich List knew that the British only wanted countries to have no resources to deal with difficulties. Friedrich List knew that. Do today's economic historians know that? Nope, they don't know that. Will today's economic historians say we need to have private credit and public credit everywhere? They're not going to say that. They're not going to do that. And that's the end of the presentation. Thank you.
You all heard it from the horse's mouth. It's the world's leading authority on the American system of political economy. Neil Martin just broke it down. So that was episode 18. And I hope you're going to join us for episode 19 because there's more where that came from. So thank you for joining us. We look forward to having you on the next episode of the American System of Political Economy podcast. Have a good night, everyone.